Hi, good morning. In the previous session, we talked about how to set up a product organization under what kind of a hierarchy. And uh, I talked about three possible opportunities or options, rather. One is under a CPO, the other is under a CTO, and the third one, which I'm to cover today, is about having a product organization set up under the CEO of the organization. Now, what is going to be interesting is while the need for a CPO fundamentally is non existent, except for possibly some internet product companies that are, I would say, heavily oriented towards the idea of having a centralized head who is representing not just a product organization but the entire company to the outside world. You don't see a fundamental need for a CPO to be there. And what I mean further by that is that the chief product officer is almost like a CEO level role in the organization with CEO level ownership and visibility and power. The idea is that the CPO fundamentally represents everything about the company, irrespective of the CEO being someone who is out there putting the company in front of investors and possibly, broadly speaking, the media. As you can see in retail or omni-channel companies, whether they are the legacy companies, be it Walmart, Target, Best Buy and so on, or any of the mid to small size companies, including some of the maturing startups like Flipkart and so on, they do not benefit from having a CPO fundamentally because the organization structure of retail organizations do not lend support to the CPO, having the business leverage to have the power to call the shots, or even have that requirement to have a presence out there in the broader community beyond a certain extent. Now, having set that aside, when I say a product organization should be under a CEO, the obvious question comes up that the CEO would be stretched thin in this scenario and wouldn't have the capacity or the, in some ways, even maybe the capabilities to run the show. But as I said earlier, you can no longer have a CEO, or you can afford to have a CEO who has no knowledge or no comfort with technology without having the presence and the ability to engage with the CTO, the Chief Technology Officer, to drive the kind of capabilities and needs required for growing the organization. So when the CEO takes over, we then run into the issue of how to set up the pyramid structure, right? So usually organizations are meant for that. Otherwise, we can keep it all flat. But I believe we do need to have a flat structure here where each functional area, and especially when it comes to omni-channel, the functional areas are easy to identify. So it could be merchandising, marketing, order management, fulfillment, supply chain, logistics, and so on. You basically have the functional heads in these areas. What's interesting is when it comes to merchandising, you may already have a chief merchandising officer. So let's take that example and try to break it down, right? So we don't need the chief merchandising officer to necessarily be replaced because that role has a unique flavor to it and a unique need for how to think about merchandising products in the context of the organization. But the chief merchandising officer should certainly have a product head responsible for thinking about everything merchandising, right from the product sourcing to having the manufacturing or the supplier relationships and the supplier capabilities set up to managing or setting up the items and innovating in that space, and then obviously ensuring that both the supplier onboarding, the item setup, the item life cycle is maintained and managed and created in the right fashion. Say, for example, leveraging AI machine learning for a better classification of items, right? So that would fundamentally fall under the product head, under the chief merchandising officer responsible for that particular funnel. And the CEO would still have what you would call as a skip level direct oversight over what the product head is doing under the chief merchandising officer. So it's almost like a partnership with the CMO enabling access to the better resources under his or her organization so that the CEO as well as the product head under the merchandising organization is basically successful. So how do you innovate? How do you create the collaboration? And that's where I think the beauty of having product heads under each functional areas actually makes it a much more a viable and a very strong organizational structure, because these product heads possibly they may be like at director level, maybe a senior director or a VP level, and that's pretty much it. That's the end of the product journey for someone who is following that career or pursuing that career, right? Unless of course they want to go into another career space and another company, maybe an internet product company and so on. But many a times what you see is that when merchandisers want to work with marketing to create campaigns, usually those interactions are at a campaign setup level, basically understanding the fundamentals of what is to be done. Many a times these campaigns or the enablement of innovation and what I would call as quick success in these areas boils down to how technology and the ability to work across functions is actually enabled within the organization. And technology is the big player in this case because technology enables that particular innovation and that enablement to happen. It basically creates what I would say as the elimination of the roadblocks that usually hinder progress and stop the ability for merchandising and marketing to create very strong bonding between their functions to deliver value to customers. And by having these functional product heads under these areas, you would expect and will see a lot of these cross-team collaborations and enabling powerful technology solutions to be built, which then enable the CTO to have the right kind of partners to directly work with, not worrying about being answerable to the CMO or the head of marketing every time he or she shows up in a meeting, but have these functional product heads be the voice of the what we can call as those business functional areas, and allow the CTO a lot of breathing space to have his teams start becoming responsible for what they are supposed to do in their engineering organizations. So that's fundamentally the easy way to, and the most, I would say, the logical way to organize companies, especially in the context of retail omni-channel, and have product organizations set up in this fashion. Now, everything comes with some caveats, but I believe that with this structure, at least what you fundamentally see as these conflict areas where technology doesn't seem to be in sync with product or doesn't feel like they should be listening to product, or business feels like they don't have a good enough voice in front of technology to get what they need to get, or in some cases even not having that stamina to think longer term in terms of technology to create solutions, is basically solved through this structure and mechanism. When we go further from here, the success stories are usually around how do we create opportunities to deliver on software solutions, both longer term but also shorter term. Given the current way AI is disrupting the market, and even keeping AI aside for a moment and say, well, we are still rapidly progressing and running at a fast pace as organizations. We do need a way to have these organizations better structured. The biggest issue I've fundamentally seen in product organizations or wherever product has a presence in any organization is that product is usually vilified as the bottleneck and the villain in the room, if you will, basically just not allowing others to so-called do great things, and somehow product takes the heat for just being the guy in the middle, just not allowing things to happen. So with that said, there's a lot more to talk about in terms of how these roles can evolve, what needs to be done, how do you run a roadmap if this is the structure that we have, who oversees the approvals and who basically ticks off on the roadmap, what I would call as the longer term and the short term roadmap, and how do you go about prioritizing the backlogs and so on, which are all the other conflict areas for product, which also makes me put up that statement saying that many a times you may want to really think if you really need a product organization, and if you could somehow do your things without a product organization in place. In today's world, I believe that the function has gained enough traction to not be be dismissed off as non-existent or non-essential. But the other statement I want to put out and share in a future video is that even in internet product companies, which have kind of shielded away from my statement saying that's still different and it can survive the way it is with all these product experts out in the market teaching different concepts, templates, tools, and whatnot, and glorifying that role. I would say even internet product companies are not necessarily innovating through the product organization funnel. That's my read. That's how I've had the opportunity to interact with certain friends of mine in different internet product companies who have had experiences that they shared with me that lend me to believe that all is not rosy on that side of the fence either, and mostly the problems are almost about the organization structure and who calls the shots, how it is done, how organization is basically living and breathing on a day-to-day basis. With that said, I'll catch you up in the next episode. Thank you. Bye.